The dusty brown mare collapsed beneath Thomas Tucker just as the weathered sign for Taylorsville, Kansas came into view through the shimmering heat of that July afternoon in 1878, leaving him stranded 3 miles from town with nothing but his saddle, his canteen, and the kind of desperate thirst that made a man question every decision that had brought him to this God-forsaken stretch of prairie. Thomas stood over the fallen horse, removing his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow as he watched her labored breathing. She had carried him faithfully for 6 years, through cattle drives and harsh winters, and now her time had come on this endless dirt road. He knelt beside her, stroking her mane gently as her breathing slowed and finally stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the Kansas heat. With the sun beating down mercilessly, Thomas hoisted his saddle onto his shoulder and began walking toward Taylorsville. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step, and within a quarter-mile, his shirt was soaked through with sweat. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by occasional scrub brush and the distant outline of what might have been a farmhouse. As he walked, Thomas reflected on the past months. The cattle drive from Texas had paid well enough, but when the boss decided to head back south, Thomas had chosen to stay. Kansas represented possibility, a chance to start fresh after years of drifting. He was 26 years old, and the wandering life that had once seemed full of adventure now felt increasingly empty. Maybe it was time to put down roots, to find work that did not require months on the trail eating dust and beans. The farmhouse he had spotted grew larger as he approached, and Thomas realized it sat much closer to the road than he had initially thought. It was a modest structure, whitewashed wood that had seen better days, with a small barn behind it and a well near the front porch. What struck him most was how quiet everything seemed. No chickens scratching in the yard, no dog barking at his approach, no signs of life except for a thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney despite the oppressive heat. Thomas hesitated at the fence line, then decided his need for water outweighed his reluctance to intrude. He opened the gate carefully, making sure to close it behind him, and walked toward the house. Before he reached the porch steps, the front door opened slightly. A woman appeared in the doorway, and Thomas stopped walking. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with auburn hair pulled back from her face and green eyes that watched him with equal parts wariness and curiosity. She wore a simple calico dress that had been mended in several places, and she held a rifle with the kind of casual familiarity that suggested she knew how to use it. "That is far enough," she said, her voice steady but not unkind. "State your business." Thomas set down his saddle and raised both hands slightly, showing he meant no harm. "Name is Thomas Tucker, madam. My horse died about a mile back, and I am hoping you might spare some water before I continue on to Taylorsville. I can pay for it." The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes taking in his worn clothes, the calluses visible on his hands, the honest exhaustion in his face. Something in her expression shifted, though the rifle did not move. "Water is free," she said finally. "Well is right there. Help yourself." "Much obliged, madam." Thomas walked to the well, pulled up the bucket, and drank deeply. The water was cold and sweet, better than anything he had tasted in weeks. He refilled his canteen, then poured some water over his head, letting it run down his neck and back. When he turned around, the woman had stepped out onto the porch, though she still held the rifle. Up close, he could see the weariness in her face, the kind that came from more than just physical labor. Her green eyes held a sadness that seemed at odds with her youth. "Thank you kindly," Thomas said, putting his hat back on. "I will be on my way now." "You said your horse died," the woman asked suddenly. "What happened to it? Old age, I reckon. Heat did not help. She gave me 6 good years. Cannot ask for more than that. Thomas picked up his saddle again, feeling its weight settle onto his shoulder. The woman bit her lip, seeming to wrestle with something internally. "It is 3 miles to town," she said finally. "In this heat, carrying that saddle, you will not make it before sundown, maybe not at all." "I have made longer walks in worse conditions, madam. I will manage." "I am sure you will." She paused, then added, "But there is a meal getting cold in my kitchen, and I cooked too much like I always do. Seems wasteful to let it go bad when there is a man standing in my yard who could probably use a hot meal." Thomas looked at her carefully. "I would not want to impose." "It is not imposing if I am offering." She lowered the rifle finally, leaning it against the doorframe. "My name is Rose Mitchell. I am a widow, so it is proper for me to tell you that before you come inside. If you are worried about appearances, you can eat on the porch." The mention of her widowhood explained the sadness in her eyes, and Thomas felt a surge of sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss, Mrs. Mitchell. It has been 8 months. Rose turned and went inside, leaving the door open behind her. After a moment, Thomas followed, setting his saddle on the porch. The interior of the house was neat but sparse. A table and 2 chairs occupied most of the main room, with a fireplace on one wall and a small stove where a pot of something that smelled delicious was simmering. There were curtains on the windows, recently washed, and a rag rug on the floor. What struck Thomas most was the silence. No clock ticking, no sounds from other rooms, just Rose and the quiet. "Sit," Rose said, gesturing to one of the chairs. She ladled stew into 2 bowls, set them on the table, then added cornbread and butter. When she sat across from him, Thomas noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "When did you last have company, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked gently. Rose looked up at him, startled by the question. "Call me Rose," she said. "And I do not remember. 2 months, maybe 3. The neighbors used to visit after Aaron died, but that stopped after a while. People have their own lives, their own concerns." Thomas understood what she was not saying. Widows made other women nervous, especially young widows. They were either objects of pity or perceived threats. Either way, they often ended up alone. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The stew was excellent, rich with meat and vegetables. Thomas realized he had not had a home-cooked meal since he left Texas months ago. "This is real good," he said. "You are a fine cook." "Thank you." Rose managed a small smile. "Aaron always said I made the best stew in Kansas." I think he was biased, but it was nice to hear. "How did you end up out here?" Thomas asked. "This is pretty isolated, even for Kansas." Rose's expression grew distant. "Aaron bought this land when we married 2 years ago. He had dreams of building it into a real ranch, raising cattle and horses. He was good with animals, could gentle the wildest horse you ever saw. But last November he went into town for supplies and his wagon overturned on the way back. Broke his neck. He died instantly." The words came out flat, recited like facts she had told herself too many times. Thomas heard the grief beneath them, still raw despite the months that had passed. "That is hard," Thomas said quietly, "losing someone sudden like that. The worst part is how normal the day was before." Rose pushed her stew around with her spoon. "We had breakfast together. He kissed me goodbye. Said he would be back before supper. Then the sheriff showed up at my door instead. Everything changed in a moment." Thomas had seen death often enough in his years on the trail, but losing a spouse was different. The silence of this house suddenly made terrible sense. Rose was not just alone. She was living in a place built for 2, surrounded by reminders of dreams that would never come true. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "If you do not mind my asking. This place must hold hard memories." Rose met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw something fierce there beneath the sadness. Because it is mine. Aaron and I built this with our own hands. Every board in this house, every fence post out there. I will not let that go just because people think a woman cannot manage alone. I did not mean to suggest you could not, Thomas said quickly. I know, Rose sighed. I am sorry. I am not used to conversation anymore. I have forgotten how to be pleasant. You have been nothing but kind to me. Thomas finished his stew and pushed back from the table. Thank you for the meal, Rose. I should head to town before it gets too late. Stay the night, Rose said suddenly, then seemed surprised by her own words. I mean, there is a room. Aaron built it for hired help we never got around to hiring. It has a bed, nothing fancy. And in the morning you can take our horse into town. He is getting old and does not do much anyway. Thomas hesitated. I could not take your horse. I am not giving him to you, just loaning him. You can bring him back when you get settled. Rose stood and began clearing the table. Besides, I could use help with something. The roof over the barn has a leak I cannot reach to fix. If you could patch it before you go in the morning, we will call it even. It was a fair trade, and Thomas suspected Rose was being generous even offering it. But something in her voice when she asked him to stay made him reconsider his refusal. It was not desperation exactly, but something close to it. A loneliness so profound it had become normalized. All right, Thomas said. I will stay the night and fix your roof in the morning. But I insist on doing any other work you need done around here as well. Fair is fair. Rose's smile reached her eyes this time, transforming her face. Deal. She showed him to the small room off the back of the house. It was barely large enough for the narrow bed and small table inside, but it was clean and cool. Thomas set down his saddlebag and returned to the main room where Rose was washing dishes. Can I help? He offered. You can dry. Rose handed him a cloth. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Thomas found himself watching Rose from the corner of his eye, noticing details he had missed before. The way her hair caught the late afternoon light, the delicate strength in her hands, the set of her jaw that suggested a stubbornness that had kept her going through the past 8 months. Can I ask you something? Rose said suddenly. Where were you headed? Before your horse died, I mean. Taylorsville, Thomas said, looking for work. I figured a town that size might need ranch hands or someone to work at the livery. I am good with horses and cattle. Been driving herds since I was 16. That is 10 years, Rose said, doing the math. You started young. Did not have much choice. My parents died of fever when I was 15. Had a choice between an orphanage or finding work. I chose work. Thomas dried the last plate and set it on the shelf. Been moving ever since. Do you ever get tired of it? The moving? Thomas leaned against the counter, considering the question. Lately, yes. Used to be I liked seeing new places, meeting new people. But somewhere along the way it started feeling less like freedom and more like running. Not sure what from exactly. Maybe from putting down roots and risking losing them. Rose turned to look at him, and her expression was knowing. That is the problem with roots, she said softly. They hurt like hell when they get torn up. They moved back to the main room where Rose started a fire in the fireplace despite the warmth of the evening. Thomas raised an eyebrow and she smiled sheepishly. I know it is hot, but I like watching the flames. It makes the house feel less empty. Thomas settled into one of the chairs while Rose sat in the other. The silence between them was different now, more companionable. As the sun set and shadows filled the room, Rose began to talk. She told him about growing up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher. About meeting Aaron when he came through town buying supplies for his journey west. About the whirlwind courtship and her decision to marry him after knowing him only 3 months. My mother said I was crazy, Rose said, staring into the fire. Said I was throwing my life away on a man I barely knew, but Aaron made me feel alive. Like the world was bigger than the little town I had always known. I never regretted marrying him, not for a single day. He was lucky to have you, Thomas said. I was lucky to have him. Rose wiped at her eyes quickly. These past months I keep thinking about all the things we did not get to do. We were going to have children, build a real ranch, grow old together. Now I am here alone, and I do not know what I am supposed to do with all these plans that do not work anymore. Thomas understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit, not from losing a spouse, but from years of watching other people build lives while he drifted past. You keep going, he said finally, because that is what you do, and maybe someday the keeping going turns into something that feels like living again. Rose looked at him for a long moment. Is that what you are doing? Keeping going, trying to, Thomas admitted. Hoping Taylorsville might be where the going turns into staying. I hope that for you, Rose said, and she sounded like she meant it. They talked long into the night, the conversation flowing easier than Thomas would have expected. Rose was intelligent and well-read, her schoolteacher father having given her an education most frontier women did not receive. She asked Thomas about his years on the trail, and he found himself sharing stories he had not thought about in years. The time his trail boss lost 100 head in a river crossing. The winter he nearly froze to death in a Montana blizzard. The strange beauty of watching the sun rise over endless prairie. Finally, when the fire had burned down to embers and Rose was stifling yawns, Thomas stood. I should let you get some rest. Thank you for the company, Rose, and the meal and everything else. Thank you for staying, Rose said quietly. Nobody ever stayed before, not after Aaron died. They visit for an hour, maybe two, then they cannot wait to leave, like grief is contagious. You are the first person who just sat with me like I am normal. Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. You are normal. You are just a woman who lost someone she loved. That does not make you strange or broken. Rose stood and impulsively reached out to squeeze his hand. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Rose. Thomas lay awake for a long time in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the prairie night. Crickets singing, wind rustling through grass, the distant howl of a coyote. He thought about Rose alone in this house night after night, surrounded by silence and memories. He thought about the way her face had lit up when she smiled. He thought about her words. Nobody ever stayed before. He was still thinking about it when he finally fell asleep. Morning came with pale light filtering through the small window. Thomas woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. He washed quickly using the basin in his room, then made his way to the main room where Rose was setting out breakfast. Morning, she said, looking more rested than she had the day before. Hope you slept well. Like a stone. Thomas sat at the table. This is quite a spread. Well, I figured you would need energy for the roof repair. Rose poured coffee for both of them. And I thought of a few other things that need fixing, if you are willing. I said I would help with whatever you need, Thomas reminded her. After breakfast, they went out to survey the work. The barn roof had several missing shingles that had left gaps where rain could get through. The fence around the small vegetable garden had posts that were rotting and leaning. The door to the well cover needed new hinges. Thomas made a mental list, calculating how long each task would take. I have lumber and tools in the barn, Rose said. Aaron was always planning projects. He left behind quite a collection. They worked through the morning, Rose helping where she could. Thomas fixed the barn roof first, replacing the missing shingles and checking the others for damage. The work felt good, purposeful in a way that driving cattle never quite had. When he finished, Rose brought out lunch and they ate in the shade of the house. You are good at this, Rose observed, watching him work on the fence posts after lunch, building and fixing things. My father was a carpenter, Thomas explained, sinking a new post into the ground. Taught me the trade before he died. That is what I thought I would do with my life, actually. Build houses and barns and such. But after he passed, I needed money quick and cattle driving paid better. Do you miss it? Carpentry? Thomas tamped down the earth around the post, considering. Yes, I miss making things. Cattle driving is just moving things from one place to another. This is creating something that lasts. By late afternoon, Thomas had repaired the fence, fixed the well cover, and replaced a broken window frame Rose had mentioned. He was working on tightening the hinges on the barn door when Rose appeared with lemonade. "You have done more than enough," she said. "The deal was just the roof. The other things needed doing." Thomas accepted the lemonade gratefully. "Besides, I like the work." Rose was quiet for a moment, then said, "Stay another night." Thomas looked at her in surprise. "Rose, I cannot keep imposing on your hospitality. It is not imposing." Rose's cheeks flushed slightly. "I just thought, well, there is more work if you want it. The porch steps are loose and the chicken coop needs repairs. I have not had chickens since Aaron died because it was not secure enough, but if it were fixed, I could get chickens again. Fresh eggs." Thomas saw through the excuse but did not call her on it. He could see the loneliness in her eyes, the reluctance to return to an empty house. And if he was honest with himself, he was reluctant to leave. Something about this place, about Rose, felt right in a way nothing had in years. "All right," he said, "I will stay and fix the chicken coop, but then I really should get to town and find proper work." Relief flooded Rose's face. "Of course, tomorrow for sure." They fell into an easy routine that second evening. Rose cooked while Thomas washed up, then they ate together and talked. This time Rose asked him about his family, what his parents had been like. Thomas found himself describing his mother's laugh and his father's patient teaching. Things he had not spoken about in years because there had been no one to tell. "They sound wonderful," Rose said. "I am sure they would be proud of the man you became." "I am not so sure about that," Thomas said ruefully. "I doubt they imagined me spending 10 years drifting with no real home or purpose." "You are here now," Rose pointed out. "Helping someone who needs it, making things better. That is purpose." After dinner, Rose brought out a deck of cards and taught Thomas a game her father had taught her. They played for hours, laughing when Thomas proved hopeless at strategy and Rose won every hand. The sound of her laughter filled the small house, warm and genuine, and Thomas realized he would do just about anything to hear it again. When they finally called it a night, Rose touched his arm gently. "Thank you," she said, "for staying, for the help, for making me remember what it is like to not be alone." "Thank you for giving me a place to stop," Thomas replied. "I did not realize how much I needed it." The next day followed much the same pattern. Thomas worked on the chicken coop, rebuilding the structure to be more secure. Rose helped, handing him tools and holding boards in place while he nailed them. They worked well together, developing an unspoken rhythm. When Thomas looked at her in the afternoon sunlight, hair escaping from her bun and a smudge of dirt on her cheek, he felt something shift in his chest. Something he had not let himself feel in a long time. Rose must have sensed his gaze because she looked up and their eyes met. For a moment neither spoke, then Rose looked away, her cheeks coloring. "I should start dinner," she said, setting down the hammer she had been holding. "Rose, wait." Thomas climbed down from where he had been working on the coop's roof. "I need to ask you something." Rose turned back, her expression wary. "What is it?" Thomas struggled with the words. "Why are you really asking me to stay, and do not say it is just about the work?" Rose bit her lip, looking down at her hands. For a long moment, Thomas thought she would not answer. Then she looked up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Because when you leave, I will be alone again," she said quietly. "And these 2 days, having you here, helping with things and talking over meals and just being another person in this house, I have felt more like myself than I have since Aaron died. I know it is selfish. I know you need to get to town and start your life. But every time I think about you leaving, I feel this panic, like I am drowning and you are the only thing keeping my head above water." The raw honesty in her words hit Thomas like a physical force. He stepped closer to her, close enough to see the freckles across her nose and the gold flecks in her green eyes. "It is not selfish," he said firmly. "And I am not staying out of obligation, Rose. I am staying because I want to. Because in 2 days you have given me more of a sense of home than I have had in 10 years. Because I like hearing your voice and seeing you smile. Because when I think about riding away from here tomorrow, it feels wrong." "What are you saying?" Rose whispered. Thomas took a breath. "I am saying maybe I do not need to go to Taylorsville. Maybe the work I am looking for is right here. You need help running this place and I need a place to stay. We could help each other." "As what? Hired help? To start, sure. But Rose, I need to be honest with you. In 2 days I have come to care about you. More than I should, probably, given that you just lost your husband. I am not asking you to feel the same way. I know you are still grieving, but I cannot pretend this is just about convenient work." Rose stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Aaron has only been gone 8 months, she said finally. "People would talk. The neighbors already look at me sideways. If I hire a single man to live on my property, they will say terrible things." "Let them talk," Thomas said. "You told me yourself you are tired of living by other people's rules. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Rose. I am just asking for a chance. To stay, to work, to see if this feeling I have is real. And if somewhere down the line you find you feel the same way, then we will figure it out together." Rose was silent for so long Thomas thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then she smiled, small and tentative but real. "All right," she said. "Stay, work the land with me. We will take it slow and see what happens." Relief and joy surged through Thomas. "Really, really," Rose laughed, wiping at her eyes. "I must be crazy, but yes, stay." Thomas wanted to pull her into his arms but restrained himself. Too soon, too much. Instead, he smiled back at her. "You will not regret this, Rose, I promise." They finished the chicken coop that afternoon, and Thomas spent the next day riding into Taylorsville to purchase supplies. Rose had given him a list: nails, chicken feed, fabric for curtains, flour, sugar, coffee. Thomas added a few things of his own: seeds for the garden, oil for the lamps, a new saw to replace Aaron's rusted one. Taylorsville was bigger than Thomas expected, with a main street lined with shops and businesses. He found everything on Rose's list at the general store, where the proprietor, a friendly man named Mr. Jenkins, welcomed him warmly. "You are new in town," Mr. Jenkins observed as he tallied up Thomas's purchases. "Thomas Tucker. Just arrived a few days ago. Looking for work." "Actually, I found a position, out at the Mitchell place." Mr. Jenkins's expression shifted, became carefully neutral. "The widow Mitchell hired you. That is good. She has had a hard time since Aaron passed. Good man, Aaron. Shame what happened to him." Thomas heard the unspoken questions in the man's tone and decided to address them head-on. "Mrs. Mitchell needs help running the ranch. She cannot do it alone. I am hired help, nothing more." "Of course," Mr. Jenkins said, though his tone suggested he would be sharing this information with others as soon as Thomas left. "Well, welcome to Taylorsville. Hope it works out for you." Thomas loaded the supplies onto the old horse Rose had loaned him and headed back to the ranch. As he rode, he considered what he had just done. He had essentially told the town he was working for Rose, which would start rumors flying immediately. But what else could he say? Lying would only make things worse when the truth came out. When he arrived back at the ranch, Rose was working in the vegetable garden. She stood when she saw him, shading her eyes against the sun. "You were gone longer than I expected," she called out. "I was starting to worry." "Taylorsville is bigger than I thought," Thomas said, dismounting. "Lots of supplies to gather." They unloaded together, carrying the purchases inside. When they were finished, Rose made coffee and they sat on the porch, enjoying the late afternoon breeze. "I met the man at the general store," Thomas said. "Mr. Jenkins." "Oh, he is a talker," Rose said with a slight smile. "I assume he asked about you." "He seemed surprised you hired help. I told him it was just work, nothing more. But Rose, you should know people are going to talk. Probably already are." Rose sipped her coffee, looking out at the prairie. "Let them. I stopped caring what people thought when none of them showed up to help me after Aaron died. They were full of sympathy at the funeral, but when it came time to actually do something, they all had excuses. Too busy, too far out, too complicated. The only person who has actually helped me is you." Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. The touch was brief but meaningful. "You are not alone anymore, Rose. I promise you that." The weeks that followed established a pattern. Thomas threw himself into improving the ranch, fixing years of neglected maintenance and implementing ideas for better organization. He repaired fences, cleared brush, expanded the garden. Rose worked alongside him when she could, but she also handled the household tasks and began making plans for the future. One evening over dinner, she spread out a hand-drawn map of the property. "Aaron wanted to build this up into a real ranch," she explained. "He drew this out before he died, showing where he wanted to expand. We have enough land for a decent herd of cattle, maybe 50 head to start, and horses. Aaron was always best with horses." Thomas studied the map, impressed by the planning that had gone into it. "This is good, smart layout. We would need to build more corrals, a bigger barn eventually, but it is doable." Rose looked up at him. Thomas felt his face heat. "I meant you. It is your land." "Thomas, you have been here 3 weeks. You work sunup to sundown every day, eating meals I cook from food you helped buy. This is as much your place now as it is mine. So yes, if you are planning to stay, we should start thinking about the future in those terms." The casual way she talked about him staying long-term made Thomas's heart skip. "You really want me here that long?" "This is not just about getting the work done." Rose set down the map and looked at him directly. "These past 3 weeks have been the best I have felt since Aaron died. Better maybe because I am not just grieving anymore, I am living. You did that, Thomas. Your presence, your kindness, the way you listen when I talk and make me laugh. I look forward to waking up in the morning again. So yes, I want you here. For as long as you are willing to stay." Thomas felt like his chest might burst. "Rose, I need to tell you something. These weeks, being here with you, I have been falling for you. I tried to keep it professional, tried to remember you are still mourning, but I cannot help how I feel. You are smart and strong and beautiful, and every day I fall a little more." Rose's eyes glistened with tears. "I know. I see the way you look at me. And Thomas, I feel it too. It scares me because it has only been 8 months since Aaron died, and I worry I am betraying his memory. But I also think he would want me to be happy. He would not want me spending my life alone out of some obligation to grief." "What are you saying?" Thomas asked, hardly daring to hope. "I am saying I have feelings for you too. I do not know if it is love yet, but it could be, if we give it time." Rose reached across the table and took his hand. "Is that enough for you, a maybe and a hope?" Thomas brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "That is more than enough." They took things slowly after that conversation, mindful of both Rose's grief and the scrutiny from town. Thomas continued sleeping in the hired hand's room, though they spent their evenings together on the porch or by the fire. They talked about everything: their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Rose told Thomas about her father's death from pneumonia when she was 17 and how lost she had felt. Thomas told Rose about the loneliness of the trail, the way he had taught himself to not form attachments because attachments meant pain. "But here you are," Rose pointed out one evening as they sat watching the sunset. "Very attached." "Here I am," Thomas agreed, putting his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. A month after Thomas arrived, Rose announced they were going to church in Taylorsville. Thomas raised an eyebrow but did not argue. They dressed in their best clothes, Thomas in the clean shirt and pants Rose had insisted on mending for him, and rode into town together on the old horse and Rose's wagon. The small church was filled with curious faces that turned to stare when Rose and Thomas entered together. Rose held her head high, walking to a pew near the middle. Thomas sat beside her, very aware of the whispers around them. After the service, several women approached Rose with tight smiles and veiled questions. Rose introduced Thomas each time as her hired hand, her tone polite but firm. Most of the interactions were brief and awkward, but one older woman, Mrs. Patterson, surprised Thomas by being genuinely kind. "It is good to see you have help, dear," Mrs. Patterson said to Rose. "That ranch is too much for one person, and you look better than you have in months. Some color in your cheeks." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Rose said, her smile becoming real. "Thomas has been a godsend." "I am sure he has," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes twinkling. She turned to Thomas. "You treat her right, young man. Rose is special." "I know she is, madam," Thomas said sincerely. As they rode back to the ranch, Rose was quiet. Finally, she said, "Thank you for coming with me. I know it was not comfortable." "It was worth it to see you hold your head high," Thomas said. "You should be proud, Rose. You are making a life here despite everything working against you." "We are making a life," Rose corrected. "Together." The kiss happened 2 weeks later, on an ordinary evening that became extraordinary. They were washing dishes after dinner, working in their usual companionable rhythm. Rose was telling a story about her childhood, something funny her father had said, and Thomas was laughing. When he turned to respond, he found Rose looking at him with such warmth in her eyes that his words died in his throat. "What?" he asked softly. "I was just thinking how much I love hearing you laugh," Rose said, "and how happy I am that you are here." Thomas set down the dish he was holding and stepped closer to her. "Rose, can I kiss you?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. Thomas cupped her face gently in his hands and leaned down, pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise. When they pulled apart, Rose was smiling. "I have been wondering when you were going to do that," she admitted. "I have been wanting to for weeks," Thomas confessed. "But I did not want to rush you." "You are not rushing me." Rose kissed him again, more confidently this time. "I have been ready." Their relationship shifted after that, becoming deeper and more certain. They still maintained propriety with Thomas in his separate room, but the affection between them was obvious. They held hands while walking around the property. Thomas kissed Rose goodbye before heading out to work each morning. Rose would watch him from the window, a soft smile on her face. 3 months after Thomas arrived, they received their first test. A group of men rode up to the ranch one afternoon, led by a heavyset man named Carl Dawson, who introduced himself as a neighbor from 5 miles east. "Heard the widow Mitchell had hired a man," Dawson said, looking Thomas up and down with obvious skepticism. "Wanted to come see for myself." "Can I help you with something, Mr. Dawson?" Rose asked, stepping out onto the porch. Her tone was polite but cool. "Just being neighborly, Mrs." Mitchell wanted to make sure everything is proper here. You being a widow and all people talk. Let them talk, Rose said, echoing the words she had said to Thomas months ago. Mr. Tucker is my employee and my business is my own. Now, Mrs. Mitchell, I do not mean any disrespect, Dawson said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But a young widow living alone with a single man, well, it does not look right. Folk are concerned. What folk? Rose demanded, her eyes flashing. The same folk who promised to help me after Aaron died and then disappeared. The same folk who crossed the street to avoid talking to me in town. Those folk can keep their concerns to themselves. Thomas stepped forward, positioning himself beside Rose. Mrs. Mitchell has explained the situation. If you have actual business, we are happy to help. Otherwise, I think you should leave. Dawson's face reddened. You have got some nerve, Drifter. You show up out of nowhere and suddenly you are making demands. I am not making demands, Thomas said evenly. I am asking you to respect Mrs. Mitchell's property and privacy. She has done nothing wrong. The tension was thick enough to cut. Finally, Dawson spat into the dirt and turned his horse. This is not over, he said. People will not stand for this kind of behavior. As the group rode away, Rose was shaking with anger. How dare he, she said. How dare he come here and imply I am doing something wrong? Thomas put his arm around her shoulders. He is just a small man trying to feel important. Ignore him. What if he causes trouble? Rose worried. What if people try to run you off? Then we will deal with it together, Thomas said firmly. I am not leaving, Rose, not unless you tell me to go. Never, Rose said fiercely, turning to face him. I will never tell you to go. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and Thomas held her tight, silently promising he would protect her and this life they were building together. The trouble Dawson threatened never quite materialized, though the whispers in town grew louder. Thomas dealt with it by working harder, making improvements to the ranch that were impossible to ignore. He built a new barn that was the envy of the county. He expanded the corrals and began buying cattle, starting the herd that Aaron had dreamed of. Rose threw herself into domestic improvements, sewing new curtains and starting a proper kitchen garden. 4 months after Thomas arrived, as autumn began to paint the prairie in shades of gold and red, he realized he could not wait any longer. He rode into Taylorsville and purchased a simple gold ring from the jeweler. That evening, after dinner, he took Rose's hand and led her outside. The sunset was spectacular, the sky painted in oranges and pinks. Thomas turned to Rose, his heart pounding. Rose Mitchell, these past 4 months have been the best of my life, he began. You gave me a home when I was lost. You taught me what it means to stay in one place and build something real. You made me believe in love again. I know people will say it is too soon, that we are rushing. But I do not care what anyone else thinks. I love you, Rose. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this ranch, raising a family, growing old together. Will you marry me? Rose's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Thomas, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her as the sun set over the Kansas prairie. In that moment, everything felt right. All the years of drifting, all the loneliness and uncertainty had led him here. To this woman, this place, this life. They married a month later in the small church in Taylorsville. Mrs. Patterson helped Rose make a new dress, pale blue with white lace. Thomas wore a new suit he had purchased with money from selling some of the cattle. The church was half full, with curious onlookers mixing with the few genuine well-wishers. Thomas did not care. All that mattered was Rose, walking down the aisle toward him with joy shining in her eyes. When the pastor asked if anyone objected to the marriage, Carl Dawson stood up. This is not right, he announced. Her husband is barely cold in the ground. Rose turned to face him, her voice steady and strong. "Aaron has been dead for a year. I loved him deeply and I always will. But he is gone and I have a right to move forward with my life. Thomas makes me happy. He is a good man who has worked hard and treated me with nothing but respect. If you cannot be happy for me, Mr. Dawson, then you are free to leave." Dawson sputtered, but several people around him were nodding in agreement. Mrs. Patterson stood up and said firmly, "Sit down, Carl. Rose deserves happiness. Let her have it." Dawson sat, and the ceremony continued without further interruption. When Thomas kissed his bride, the kiss was met with genuine applause from most of those gathered. The reception was held at the ranch, which Thomas and Rose had spent days preparing. They roasted a pig and served it with all the fixings Rose could make. People danced to music provided by a fiddler from town. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Thomas pulled Rose into his arms on their makeshift dance floor. "Mrs. Tucker," he said, loving the sound of it. "How does it feel?" "Right," Rose said simply. "It feels right." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of love and promise. When Thomas held Rose in his arms afterward, he felt a completeness he had never known before. This was home. This was where he belonged. The years that followed were filled with hard work and happiness in equal measure. Thomas expanded the ranch steadily, building the dream that Aaron had started. Rose proved to be an excellent partner, managing the finances and helping with the cattle. They were a team in every sense of the word. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Rose told Thomas she was expecting. His joy was boundless. When their son was born that November, they named him Aaron Thomas Tucker, honoring both the man whose dream they were building and the new life they had created together. Little Aaron was a healthy, happy baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Thomas took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, rising in the night to walk the baby when he cried, teaching him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, reading to him from the few precious books Rose had brought from Missouri. 2 years later, a daughter arrived. They named her Margaret Rose, though everyone called her Maggie. She was fierce and fearless from the start, following her older brother everywhere and demanding to do everything he did. Rose laughed that she was getting her stubbornness paid back to her. The ranch thrived. Thomas hired 2 hands to help with the growing herd, building proper quarters for them in a new structure he added to the property. Rose opened a small trading post out of their front room, selling supplies to neighboring ranchers and travelers. It brought in extra money and gave her a connection to the community beyond Taylorsville. Over the years, the whispers about their marriage faded. They became simply the Tuckers, the hard-working couple with the successful ranch. When Carl Dawson lost his own ranch to debt 3 years after trying to disrupt their wedding, Thomas and Rose bought his land, expanding their holdings significantly. Thomas took no pleasure in Dawson's misfortune, but he could not deny the satisfaction of proving his doubters wrong. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Rose to the hill overlooking their property. The view was spectacular. The main house they had expanded and improved, the large barn and corrals, the grazing cattle, the fields of wheat they had started planting. 2 children played in the yard below, supervised by the wife of one of their ranch hands. "You remember the day we met?" Thomas asked, his arm around Rose's waist. "You were covered in dust, dying of thirst, and trying to walk 3 miles in the heat," Rose said with a smile. "Not your finest moment, but your finest," Thomas countered. "You took in a stranger, gave him water and food and a place to stay. You saved my life, Rose." "You saved mine too," Rose said softly. "I was drowning in loneliness and grief. You reminded me what it meant to be alive, to hope, to love." Thomas turned her to face him. "I have never regretted a single moment of the life we built together. Every day I wake up grateful that my horse died on that road, grateful that I stopped here, grateful that you asked me to stay." "Nobody ever stayed before," Rose said, echoing the words she had spoken so long ago. "Until you. I am never leaving," Thomas promised, kissing her. "This is where I belong, with you, always." 3 more children arrived over the following years. Twin boys they named Jonathan and Samuel, and finally another daughter, little Ruth. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Thomas built additions until the simple farmhouse had become a sprawling ranch house, filled with noise and laughter and life. Aaron Thomas Tucker grew into a fine young man who shared his father's skill with carpentry and his mother's head for business. At 19, he began courting the daughter of the Taylorsville Bank president, a smart young woman named Elizabeth who fit right into the Tucker family. Maggie proved to be the best rider of all the children, fearless on horseback. She helped with the cattle drives and could rope better than most grown men. Thomas privately thought she would run the ranch someday, though Rose worried about her wild streak. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief together. And little Ruth, arriving when Rose was 37 and Thomas was 40, was the baby who charmed everyone she met. As the children grew and the ranch prospered, Thomas and Rose fell into the comfortable rhythm of a couple who had weathered storms together and come out stronger. They still had their rituals: coffee on the porch every morning, hands held during evening walks, quiet conversations by the fire after the children were in bed. On Thomas's 50th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Aaron and Elizabeth had married and were expecting their first child. Maggie had reluctantly agreed to let a local rancher's son court her, though she insisted she was just being polite. The twins were 16 and full of plans about expanding the ranch's operations. Ruth, at 9, was already reading at a level far beyond her years, reminding everyone of Rose's father. As Thomas looked around the table at his family, he felt a wave of overwhelming gratitude. This life, these people, this home, it was more than he had ever dreamed possible. The lonely drifter who had walked up to this ranch 24 years ago would not have believed any of this could be real. After dinner, Rose pulled him aside. "Come with me," she said, taking his hand. She led him to the barn, to the same spot where he had fixed the chicken coop all those years ago. The original structure was long gone, replaced by something much larger and more secure. But the spot held significance for them both. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Rose asked, leaning against Thomas's chest. "I think about the moment I decided to ask you to stay that first night. I had convinced myself to just let you walk away. It was safer, easier. But something made me speak up, made me offer you a meal and a bed." "Fate," Thomas suggested. "Maybe," Rose agreed. "Or maybe just loneliness recognizing itself in someone else. Either way, I am grateful I found the courage to ask. You could have said no. Probably should have said no, but you stayed." "Best decision I ever made," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. "You are my home, Rose. You always have been." 25 years after Thomas first arrived at the ranch, they celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary. The ranch now encompassed nearly 1,000 acres and ran over 300 head of cattle. The trading post had grown into a proper store that Rose ran with help from Maggie. Aaron and Elizabeth had 3 children of their own, with another on the way. The twins had built houses on opposite ends of the property, both marrying local girls and starting their own families. Even Ruth was courting now, a shy but intelligent boy from town who worked as a schoolteacher. Thomas was 51, his dark hair now thoroughly streaked with gray. Rose was 48, still beautiful in his eyes with laugh lines around her green eyes and the same bright smile that had first captured his heart. They sat on the porch together as they had countless evenings before, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. "Do you ever miss it?" Rose asked suddenly. The traveling, the freedom of the open trail. Thomas considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "I thought that was what I wanted, what I needed, but it was just running. What we have here, this is real, this is living." "I am glad you stayed," Rose said softly. "I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not. I might have lost the ranch, ended up back in Missouri living with distant relatives, or just stayed here alone, slowly fading away." "Neither of those things happened," Thomas reminded her. "You were stronger than you thought. You would have found a way." "Maybe," Rose allowed, "but it would not have been this good, this happy. You gave me that, Thomas, you and the children and this life. When Aaron died, I thought happiness was over for me. You proved me wrong." "You did the same for me," Thomas said. "I did not even realize how empty my life was until I found you. Now I cannot imagine anything different." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. From the house came the sound of laughter, Ruth entertaining her siblings with some story. The sound made them both smile. "Tell me about tomorrow," Rose said, their old game. They had been playing it for years, planning the next day together. "Tomorrow I am going to ride out with Aaron to check the northern fences," Thomas said. "Then we have that meeting with the cattle buyer from Kansas City. And in the evening, I am going to sit on this porch with my beautiful wife and count my blessings." "That sounds perfect," Rose said. "What about you?" "I am going to work the store in the morning. Then Elizabeth and I are going to work on plans for Aaron's birthday party next month. And in the evening, I am going to sit on this porch with my handsome husband and thank God for the day I was brave enough to ask a stranger to stay for dinner." Thomas pulled her close, kissing her deeply. After 24 years of marriage, the spark between them was as strong as ever. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, sick children and financial worries, the judgment of neighbors and the weight of running a large ranch. Through it all, they had each other. When their first grandchild, Aaron and Elizabeth's eldest daughter, Rose Caroline, turned 16, she asked Thomas to tell her the story of how he and her grandmother had met. Thomas had told the story before, but never in quite as much detail as he did that day, sitting on the porch with the girl who carried Rose's name. He told her about his horse dying on the road, about seeing the farmhouse in the distance, about the woman with the rifle and the green eyes who had offered him water. He told her about the loneliness he had seen in Rose and recognized, because he carried the same loneliness himself. He told her about the decision to stay, about falling in love, about building a life together through hard work and dedication and faith in each other. "So you gave her your time," young Rose Caroline said when he finished, "when nobody else would." "I gave her my time," Thomas agreed. "And she gave me a reason to stop running." "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," Rose Caroline said, sighing happily. Thomas laughed. "Tell me that again when you are old enough to understand that romance is not just grand gestures. It is showing up every day. It is keeping promises. It is choosing to stay even when things are hard." "Did you ever think about leaving?" she asked curiously. In those early days, Thomas considered the question honestly. "No," he said finally, "not once. From the moment I decided to stay, I never wavered. Your grandmother was worth staying for. This life was worth building. I have never regretted it." Rose appeared then, coming out of the house with lemonade for them both. At 63, she moved a bit slower than she once had, but she was still strong and capable. When she smiled at Thomas, He saw the same woman who had offered him water 29 years ago. "What are you two plotting out here?" she asked, settling into her favorite chair. "Grandpa was telling me how you met," Rose Caroline said. "How he gave you his time when nobody else would stay." Rose reached over and took Thomas's hand. "He did more than that," she said. "He gave me hope. He gave me a future. He gave me a family and a life I never thought I would have again. Time was just the beginning." Thomas squeezed her hand gently, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. After all these years, she could still move him with her words. Young Rose Caroline looked between them and smiled. "I want to find love like that someday," she declared. "You will," Rose promised. "When the time is right and the person is worth staying for, you will know." By the time Thomas was 60, the ranch had been passed down to Aaron Thomas Tucker, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. Thomas still worked every day, unable to imagine sitting idle, but the heavy responsibilities now rested on younger shoulders. He and Rose had built a smaller house just beyond the main ranch house, a cozy place where they could watch their grandchildren play while maintaining their privacy. They had 14 grandchildren now, with 2 more on the way. The family gathered every Sunday for dinner at the main house, filling it with noise and chaos and joy. Thomas loved watching the children run through the same rooms his own children had played in, loved seeing Aaron teaching his sons to ride the way Thomas had taught him. "We did good," Rose said one Sunday afternoon as they walked back to their house after the weekly gathering. "Look at this family we made. Look at what we built." "We did very good," Thomas agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." That night, as they lay in bed together, Rose turned to him. "Thomas Tucker, I want you to know something. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You have been my partner, my best friend, my love. Every single day with you has been a gift." Thomas pulled her close, feeling the familiar warmth of her body against his. "Rose Tucker, you saved my life in every way that matters. You taught me what home means. You gave me everything worth having. I love you more now than I did the day we married." "That is saying something," Rose teased. "You loved me quite a lot that day." "And every day since," Thomas confirmed, kissing her. They were 70 and 67 respectively when the pneumonia hit. It was a hard winter, and despite their best efforts, both Thomas and Rose fell ill. Their children took turns nursing them, worry evident in every face. For a week, it was uncertain whether either would survive, but they had fought too hard and loved too much to give up easily. Slowly, painfully, they both recovered. By spring, they were back to their normal routines, though moving perhaps a bit more carefully than before. "That was too close," Aaron said to his father one afternoon. "You scared us." "Scared myself," Thomas admitted, "but I am not done yet. Your mother and I have more years left in us." And they did. 5 more good years where they watched their youngest grandchildren grow and their oldest great-grandchildren arrive. 5 years of coffee on the porch and evening walks and hands held in the darkness. 5 years of love and laughter and the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. Thomas Tucker died peacefully in his sleep at 75, Rose beside him as she had been for 34 years of marriage. He went to bed one November night and simply did not wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, that it had just worn out. Rose knew the truth. His heart had been too full, had loved too much and too well. It had given everything it had. The funeral filled the church in Taylorsville to overflowing. Thomas had become a pillar of the community over the years, respected for his hard work and his dedication to family. But mostly people came because of the love story everyone knew. The drifter and the widow who had built something beautiful together. Rose stood at the gravesite, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and spoke from the heart. Thomas gave me his time when nobody else would stay, she said, her voice strong despite her grief. He gave me 34 years of love and partnership. He gave me this family, this legacy. He was the best man I ever knew, and I will love him until my last breath and beyond. She lived 3 more years after Thomas died, long enough to see Aaron's oldest son take over daily operations of the ranch, long enough to meet 2 more great-great-grandchildren. She spent her days in the small house she had shared with Thomas, surrounded by memories and visited constantly by family who refused to let her be alone. But everyone could see she was fading, that her heart had left with Thomas. On a warm spring morning, almost exactly 3 years after Thomas's death, Rose passed away in her sleep, a smile on her face. The family found a letter on her bedside table, addressed to all of them. In it, Rose wrote about the day Thomas had arrived, covered in dust and dying of thirst. She wrote about her decision to ask him to stay, about the fear and loneliness that had driven her to reach out to a stranger. She wrote about falling in love, about building a life together, about the joy and purpose Thomas had brought to her existence. "I was lost when he found me," she wrote. A widow drowning in grief with no idea how to move forward. Thomas gave me his time, his work, his heart. He stayed when nobody else would. And in staying, he taught me that love is not just a feeling but a choice made new each day. Choose love, my darlings. Choose to stay for the people who matter. Choose to build something that lasts. That is the greatest gift you can give or receive. The letter ended with instructions that she be buried beside Thomas, under the oak tree on the hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. "So I can watch over our legacy forever," she wrote. "And wait for all of you to join us someday, so we can tell you again how much we loved you." The funeral was even larger than Thomas's had been. Rose had become a legend in her own right. The strong woman who had refused to be defeated by tragedy, who had built a trading post into a successful business, who had raised 5 remarkable children and countless grandchildren. But mostly people came to honor the love story that had inspired an entire community. As they lowered Rose's casket into the ground beside Thomas's, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the gathered family. Aaron Thomas Tucker, now an old man himself, stood with his hand on his oldest son's shoulder and said, "They were together for 34 years. Not nearly long enough, but they made every day count. That is what we have to remember. That is how we honor them." The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the Tucker family. Thomas and Rose's children made sure the story was preserved, told to every new generation. The day Thomas arrived with nothing but a saddle and determination, the widow who took him in. The love that grew from loneliness and loss into something powerful and enduring. In time, the small farmhouse where it all began was preserved as a family museum of sorts, filled with artifacts from Thomas and Rose's life together. The rifle Rose had held that first day. The hand-drawn map of the ranch. The simple gold wedding ring Thomas had bought in Taylorsville. Letters and photographs and tools and clothing, all the physical remnants of 2 lives lived fully and together. But the real legacy was not in things. It was in the family that filled the ranch every Sunday, in the love that bound them together, in the values of hard work and dedication, and staying that Thomas and Rose had instilled in their children and their children's children. The story became legend in Taylorsville and the surrounding area. The cowboy who gave his time to a lonely bride, the woman who said nobody ever stayed before, the love that saved them both and built something that lasted generations. And on warm summer evenings, if you stood on the hill near the oak tree where Thomas and Rose were buried, you could almost hear them. The sound of laughter on the breeze, the quiet murmur of conversation. the rustle of movement as two souls sat together, watching over the family they created and the legacy they left behind. Because some loves are too powerful to be contained by death. Some loves echo through the years, shaping everyone they touch. Thomas and Rose's love was that kind of love. The kind that changed lives and built futures. The kind that proved that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to give their time, to stay when everyone else leaves, to choose love even when fear says run. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and separation. But it also never ended, living on in every child who learned what real love looked like, in every couple who chose to stay and fight for each other, in every person who heard the tale and believed that true love was possible. Thomas Tucker had walked up to that farmhouse in 1878, a lonely drifter with nothing to his name. He died 75 years later a wealthy man, but not because of land or cattle or money. He was wealthy in the ways that truly mattered, in love received and given, in family raised and cherished, in a life lived with purpose and passion. Rose Mitchell had been a widow drowning in grief when Thomas arrived. She died Rose Tucker, beloved matriarch of a family that stretched across Kansas and beyond, remembered for her strength and business acumen, and most of all for the love she and Thomas had shared. Their grave under the oak tree became a place of pilgrimage for the family, where couples came to renew their commitment to each other, where children came to hear stories of their ancestors, where anyone who needed to remember what mattered most in life could come and find peace. The inscription on their shared headstone was simple: Thomas Tucker, 1852–1927, and Rose Tucker, 1855–1930. He stayed, she loved. Together they built everything that mattered. And that was the truth of it, the whole story contained in a few words. Thomas gave Rose his time when nobody else would stay. Rose gave Thomas a reason to stop running. Together they built a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes, that became the foundation for generations of happiness and success. The ranch continued, the family grew, the years passed. But the story remained, told and retold, never losing its power to move those who heard it, because it was more than just a story. It was a testament to what is possible when two lonely people find each other, when someone decides to stay instead of running. When love is given time to grow and flourish and become something that changes everything. Thomas and Rose Tucker had lived their love story in full, holding nothing back, giving everything they had to each other and to the family they created. They had proven that from loss and loneliness could come joy and purpose, that the end of one story could be the beginning of something even better. That love, real love, was worth every risk and every moment of vulnerability. And so the story ended where it had begun, at a farmhouse in Kansas where a cowboy had once given his time to a lonely bride. The house had changed, the land had changed, the people had changed. But the love remained, eternal and unchanging, a beacon for all who came after. A reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stay, one person brave enough to say yes to possibility, one person who chooses love despite every reason not to. Thomas and Rose had been those people for each other. And in being those people, they had created something that would never truly die. A love story for the ages. A legacy of devotion and partnership and unwavering commitment. The kind of story that made people believe in love again. The kind of story that changed lives simply by existing. The story of the cowboy who gave his time to a lonely bride, and the woman who said nobody ever stayed before, and the lifetime of happiness they built together from that one simple choice to give love a chance.